Hello everybody and welcome to Tower Defense. This is the game that we're going to be making over a very short period of time. Tower Defense game, and we're going to create it together. Similar to the RPG game, I've got a pre-made one and I'm going to talk you through how I went about building this game. So what we have first and foremost on our left hand side are the number of sprites that we're going to need. I have a sprite for an enemy, a sprite for a tower, a sprite for the tower to place because that's going to be the heads up display or the user interface object, this object here that we physically drag and place into the room. The bullet that's going to shoot, a path that's nothing more than an aesthetic thing that doesn't really need to be there. I've just placed it in because it gives a clear view for what the player needs to do. A tree, purely again for aesthetics. Enemy end, that object's going to be when we touch that point down here, it's game over. And then the interface, and that's just this sprite here because I think that it's nice to have a heads up display object. The objects are all identical. We've got an object that marries up to each one of the sprites. So I've got one for enemy, tower, bullet, path, tree, enemy end, tower interface, and the tower itself. The one thing that you'll notice that's different is we have enemy spawn that's represented by this little object down here on screen, obj enemy spawn and obj hood. So let's go through this one by one. Going to look at our obj enemy to start off with. This is going to be very familiar to a lot of people. If you've already done the RPG tutorial, it will look exactly the same as that. Our enemy is created, has a set amount of HP, follows path at a speed of 3. So what I've got going on here is that it follows the enemy path that's been set up at a speed of 3. When it reaches the end, just stops and then follow it absolutely. Again, you'll remember that means snap to where the path actually is and follow it 100%. Don't make it relative, follow it absolutely. When the enemy collides with a bullet, remove 1 HP, just as we've done a bunch of times before, 1 HP for our enemy. Destroy the bullet to get rid of that. And then if it's got no HP, destroy the enemy. And that's what we've got going on down there. And I'm also incrementing score. Score goes up as the game progresses, obviously. So score equals score plus 1. But you've probably seen me do that score plus equals 1. That's just a coding shortcut which I like to use. Increment by 1. You'll see both work exactly fine. Score plus equals 1. That mentioned about following a path. So the path that I've created here, you can do exactly the same by right-clicking create path. What you will notice is when you create a path though, it comes to this screen here, which is blank. You need to click on this icon at the top next to the snapping to indicate which level you want to overlay your points on. If you haven't made a path before, remember that by default it creates a closed path which will loop all the way around. We don't want a closed path, we want that to be just a path like this. And again, remember if you haven't done one before, you can move these points. I'm going to remove path 2 because we don't need it. So going back through our objects and the code that we've got, so hopefully that's made enemy clear. The tower is again quite straightforward and very similar to enemies that we've had before. We have a wait time, so I've said when the tower is created, wait for 15 frames, which is half a second, and then when the alarm rings, tests if there is an enemy in the game. This is a big deal because the next step is going to be the bullet is going to move towards the nearest enemy. If there isn't a nearest enemy, it's going to crash. So the first thing here, if the distance to object, or the object we're looking for is object enemy, is less than 100, then we create a new bullet and then we reset the wait time as we've done a load of times before. Don't forget though guys, if you are going to be using this, that section there, that 100 is your range for your tower. If you wanted a bigger range, just increase the number. The bullet itself is a little bit more interesting. So what this does here is this checks that there is an enemy that exists within the room. Again, if we don't do that, the next line of code is going to fail. And the next line of code says, create a variable called obj. That just means a temporary thing for our bullet to remember. And it's going to remember which one is the nearest enemy. That's as the bullet is created, remember the nearest enemy to it. So towers don't remember the nearest enemy, bullets do. You can change that if you want to, but that's how I've set this up. And again, that is going obj equals the nearest instance. Remember, instance is our keyword because it's to do with objects. Instance underscore nearest to my x to my y, find the nearest enemy. And then this moves it towards that point. So move underscore towards underscore point, and then it wants to move towards obj underscore x, obj y, and then you've got that property there, which is the spur, the speed that it's looking for. So that's move underscore. Now, can we do move underscore towards object? No, we can't. We can't. That's a little bit too ambitious for me. So we've got that code on screen at the minute that allows the bullet to move towards the nearest object. The spawn point is something a few people have asked for. So again, the enemy spawn here is just going to wait for 1 second, and then when the alarm goes off, spawns an enemy and resets the wait time, just as we've done quite a few times here. So that's going to keep our spawn point going every second. If you want it to take a little bit longer, just change the wait time in between them. The path is nothing. The path doesn't do anything. All I've chosen to do with the path is to make it solid. The reason why the path is solid is that stops me from placing a tower on the path. So I've released my mouse and it didn't let me place it there, but it will let me place it anywhere there isn't a path. So that's something that I can do. What I've now got is tree. Tree doesn't do anything at all. That's again just merely solid and purely aesthetic. We have enemy end, which is when the enemy collides with the enemy end. Decrease score. Again, I'm just going to tidy this up as to the format that I like. Score minus equals 1. That takes 1 score away. With other, destroy. So again, just as before, get rid of the enemy once it's touched it. We don't want it touching it over and over again and taking our game over quickly. And then if the score is less than or equal to 0, the game's going to restart. So that's again a way of keeping a record of how well we're doing. You could easily use this score variable like you would money, and you need certain amounts of money to place your tower. But that's up to you. I'm going to show you the basics. And then the tower interface, that's again purely aesthetic. So the tower interface is nothing more than just this box here. Doesn't do anything, just looks pretty. However, the interface tower, this is where the magic happens. Okay, this is something we haven't yet done. Everything up until this point is fairly straightforward. This one I guarantee you won't yet have done. What this has to know is when it's created, is this object movable? Can I move this around or not? And by default, I can't. So I can't click on this, well, I can't move this tower by default. It's not following me around. So I've created a variable called isMovable. Notice I've done a capital M for movable, lower for I. Just if you're wondering, guys, why rename things like this? This is called camel case. So you're used to uppercase, you're used to lowercase. This is camel case, where we've got 2 words separated. You might be wondering why we use camel case to separate things together. Well, underscores work fine, as you've seen. It's to separate words like that, to make it clear that for the filthy-minded amongst you, no, we are indeed Pen Island. Separates it, makes it clearer for us as to what each variable it refers to. Separates things in between the words. So that creates this isMovable variable, which by default is false. The end step, if you're wondering how you get to end step, you click on step and then you go end step. On the end step, we are going to say if movable is true, if we can possibly move this, we're going to set our x, remember we are the tower, with the interface tower. By interface I'm just meaning the heads up display object. Set our x to wherever the mouse underscore x is and the y to wherever the mouse y is, and then this little piece of code here merely snaps it on a 16 by 16 grid to make sure that it's not too fiddly. The player could line things up a little bit more easily. And then this is the interesting stuff. When I press on the tower, when I left click on it, isMovable becomes true. And then when I global release, notice this says global release. What this means, and I'll show you how you get there, mouse, global left release, wherever it is down here. What this means is, if I release the left click anywhere on screen, literally anywhere, do this. Whereas left pressed or left release means only if my cursor is hovering over the object at the time. You can have a bit of a play with this, but just trust me that global left released is what we're looking for here. And then here's the code for that. So what this checks is if the object is movable when you release, so the object is moving us around by this point, next thing is to perform a check. Is the place empty? I want to place it in. That code there checks for, is there a solid object under my x and y coordinate? We know that we set path to be a solid object over here. So if path is solid, and I'll try and put this over a path, it won't let me do that. Same for a tree. If you wanted to limit where in the game your player could put things, you could do this, or you can get rid of it, up to you. Then we create an instance of a tower, like we've done a million times by now, create an object wherever I am, resets the position of the interface object back on screen, so my x becomes x start. You won't have seen these phrases yet, but every object records where it started the game, where it started in the room, so you can always reset to x start and y start, which I've done there. Then the last and most important thing is we reset is movable as we go. Don't forget as well, guys, the start of each of these lines you have open squigglies, which are married up with closed squigglies at the bottom. Remember, we can't have lonely squigglies, they always come in pairs. And then obj underscore HUD. All the heads-up display here is keeping a record of our score, so on create score equals 0, makes sense, we haven't got any points yet. And then to draw that, draw underscore text, where I am, my x, my y, the text score is, and then also display with plus the score, but remember we need to turn score, which is a number, into some text, which is a string, which is why we've got those brackets in there. Convert that into a piece of text, which is going to be a string. That's all you need to make a tower defense game. Like I said, you could add an awful lot more to this. You could make it so you could only place towers once you have a certain amount of money, or you'd spend score or cost in order to place towers, and you earn that over time. Based on what you did with the RPG, you could have waves that increment over time. You could have more HP depending on which wave it is. You could upgrade your towers. You could have an upgrade mode for your towers. Really up to you what you wanted to do with the game. But ultimately that's the fundamental basics, and the most important part there that we won't really have covered before is the placing of that tower on screen and spawning more objects. Well done.